Hello, everyone. We will start very soon. I feel like this is really echoey and loud, but anyway. Other people will be coming in, but we will just start because the thing is this. Our speaker today has to leave sharp at about 6:30. All right, so we have to keep time. And that means that if you're going to ask questions, they have to count. They have to be good ones, all right? So no bad questions, no pressure, right? But there's no bad questions today. They have to be really good ones, and you have to kind of do it like that. So I'm Professor Daniel Chua. I am a chair professor here in music, and I'm also a director of faith and global engagement. And it's a real privilege today to have Gina Zurlo here, who is lecturer and a senior researcher at the Divinity School at Harvard. Now, the thing I'm really proud about Gina is that she studied music as an undergraduate, right? And this is really important for me because it proves my pet theory that the brightest minds are musical minds, okay? It's really, really important. So just remember that. Yeah, the other thing is, of course, I remained in music as a musicologist, but Gina saw the light and she left the dark side of music and she went to study world Christianity, world religion, and she's done really, really well. You probably know that she's editor of the World Christian Database, and she's done a lot of work. She loves crunching numbers, and she crunches them so well that in 2019, the BBC, no less, declared that Gina is among the top 100 most influential women in the world because of her work on world religions. And yes, indeed, right? And this is the reason why, since we both studied music, I'm just introducing her, but she's going to give the talk today. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Gina Zurlo. She talks about the future of Christianity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was probably the most energetic introduction I've ever had. That is so exciting. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for creating space to have this conversation. I'm really only in Hong Kong for like 3 or 4 days. I'm on to Korea for 24 hours tomorrow, and then Tokyo for 48 hours. And this is just what we do in World Christianity Studies. So this is my first time in Hong Kong, and I absolutely love this place, so I will be back. Also, I have been so overfed while I have been here. I have never eaten so much in my life in the last 2 or 3 days. So I need to recover from this trip, but I'll be back for more because it's so good. So today, we're talking about the future of Christianity, babies, converts, migrants. Did anyone come because of the subtitle of the talk? Why babies, converts, migrants? Well, this is how religion changes. So at the national level, there's only 3 ways a religion can grow. You're born into it, you convert into it, or you move into that country, right, with your religion. And there's only 3 ways a religion declines. You die, you leave that religion, or you leave that country and take your religion with you. And so this is what we call the dynamics of religious change. So you have your positive factors, your negative factors, and that's your net religious change. It's just a big formula. And so this is what we do in the demography of religion. We're tracking birth rates, death rates, conversions in and out of religion, and then tracking the movement of people all around the world and what happens to their religion when they cross these national boundaries. So all of the trends that we are going to explore together today are really driven by babies, converts, and migrants. Babies really are the future of world Christianity. So where we're going to go tonight, we're going to do a brief history of quantifying world Christianity. Have you ever heard such a phrase? It is my most favorite thing, actually, in the world. The history of the quantification of world Christianity is way better than music studies. I'm sorry. So exciting. And then we'll take a look at the data itself from the year 1900 to 2075. That is not a typo. We're going to look at the past, the present, and the future. And then look at specific Christian traditions and movements, some trends by continent, and then a few important issues for Christians today. I always like to start all of these discussions with a quote to consider to help ground us as we enter into this material. So tonight's quote to consider comes from my friend and colleague, Lalsankima Pachuao, who wrote a great little book called World Christianity, A Historical and Theological Introduction. And Dr. Pachuao is a theologian from Mizoram in northeast India, a majority Christian province in India. And he wrote this: Christianity exists between the universal claim of its message and the particular way of practicing the faith. So this is a bit of a tension in world Christianity studies, that we have a lot of different expressions of Christianity all around the world, yet there is some universality about it that connects Christians. So as we go through these trends, let's just keep this in mind: universality and particularity at the same time. Now, to do good data, you must do good history. I am a social scientist, but actually my PhD is in history, not in social science, but social science is really my main thing. I just jumped disciplines, actually. My bachelor's, master's, and PhD are all in 3 different fields. So there's hope for your students out there. If you're a little lost, it'll all work out in the end. It did for me. But I want to start with history so you know, where does this come from? How does one quantify Christianity? So I want to tell you the story of David Barrett. David Barrett was a British Anglican aeronautical engineer who worked for the British Royal Aircraft Establishment after World War II. However, the RAF assigned him to bomb design, designing airplanes to drop bombs on people, and this did not align very well with his pacifist leanings. So he became a priest instead. So these are your career options: bomb design or missionary priest, okay? And so he got sent to Western Nyanza province in Kenya in 1957. And when he arrived in Kenya in 1957, the largest African-led Christian movement was breaking away from the Anglican-founded church in this kind of colonial, decolonial process. So you have African Christians starting new African movements led by Africans, asking African questions and getting African answers. And so David Barrett is a white British missionary in the midst of this, trying to figure out his place. And so what did he do? He started to count. He started to count all of the new African Christians in these new African churches, and then started to ask himself, if these breakaway movements are happening here in Kenya, are they happening anywhere else in the world? And because he was a missionary, and really he was just a very big thinker, he started counting Christians in sub-Saharan Africa and then expanded his analysis to the entire world. So he traveled to 212 countries looking for the best available data on Christianity and world religions. There was only 223 countries in the world at the time, and these are actual passport pages from David Barrett's passports that we have in the World Christian Database archives. I actually wrote my doctoral dissertation on David Barrett and how he became the first person to quantify the entire religious and non-religious worlds. And so when he would travel around the world, he would talk to local Christian communities. He would ask to speak to the oldest Christian in a community to get an oral history of how Christianity arrived and grew. He would look for unpublished material, only local available material. He would even get census data from governments that they had kept in basements that they hadn't processed, and he would process it for himself. And so in doing this, he pioneered a new global methodology using different kinds of sources, methods, and assumptions, which was required to make new discoveries in a rapidly changing world. Now, in 1968, the very famous sociologist of religion, Peter Berger, he predicted the demise of religion by the year 2000. And he was certain that by the 21st century, religious believers are likely to be found only in small sects, huddled together to resist a worldwide secular culture. It was all very dramatic. So he's saying religion will be dead and gone by the year 2000. Okay, well, David Barrett is in Africa. And he looks around and says, this looks like a pretty religious place to me. And so he published an article in the year 1970 where he said, I think there's going to be 350 million Christians in Africa by the year 2000. Certainly not the demise of religion. Now, in the 1990s, Peter Berger famously recanted his position, and he said, I think what I and most other sociologists of religion wrote in the 1960s was a mistake. The world is certainly religious. And in a wonderful full circle moment, Peter Berger actually helped establish the World Religion Database at Boston University and became a huge supporter of our work. It's the greatest example of academic humility that has ever existed, actually. So after travel to nearly every country in the world, gathering statistics on over 20,000 Christian denominations, Barrett published his work in the first edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia in 1982. And he presented a copy to Pope John Paul II at the Vatican that year. Now, the World Christian Encyclopedia marked a really important point in 20th century global Christian history. This was the first time that all the world's Christians were together in a single book. Catholics, Orthodox, all different kinds of Protestants, evangelicals, Pentecostals, all the new African churches, all together with really no distinction between them. If you call yourself a Christian, you're counted as a Christian. But it was also a great interreligious project because David Barrett was the first person to quantify how many Buddhists were in the world, how many atheists were in the world, how many Hindus were in the world, because Christianity lives in its context. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. So it was very important for Barrett to present Christianity in its global religious context. So Barrett actually moved to the United States in 1985, and he got together with Todd Johnson, and they produced the second edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia in 2001. I joined the research team in 2007. This is pretty much the only thing I've done in my adult life is work on the World Christian Database. And I wrote the third edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia with Todd Johnson, and I gave a copy to Pope Francis at the Vatican in 2023. And I also gave the Pope a copy of the photo of David Barrett and John Paul II from 40 years prior and explained to him my predecessor, his predecessor, and the importance of this moment so we could recreate this iconic photo 40 years later. Really a truly wonderful opportunity. But now I have to write another encyclopedia because we have a new Pope. So I have a lot of work to do. So the reason I share this history is for a couple reasons. One is the entire field of the demography of religion traces back to David Barrett, a missionary, who just had a question and said it should be matters of fact who adheres to each religion in the world. With all the modern technology we have in the year 1982, we should know this, right? So out of his academic quest, but also his personal quest as a Christian, he wanted to know what was happening in the religious world and what was Christianity's relationship to other world religions. Now, I'm actually going to answer the question that someone will ask in the Q&A first, just so we could do it. Where do you get your numbers? Because I'm about to show you a lot of different numbers. So in the spirit of the method of David Barrett that I have now inherited, I'm the third generation of this work, we collect data from government censuses, so religion data, ethnicity, country of origin, migration, language, all kinds of census data. I was actually working in China, Iraq, and Ireland this morning. So every day I'm in a different country processing data, and I love it. We collect data from social scientific surveys that ask religion questions. How important is religion? What is your religion? Do you believe in God? All these kind of surveys. So a lot of demographers do this. But this is what makes us different at the World Christian Database, is that we collect data from religious communities themselves. And a lot of Christian churches know how to count. If you were a part of a church and you've ever filled out a survey as a pastor or a leader, it ends up in an annual report somewhere that ends up on my desk. So please fill out your surveys and make sure they're right, because we actually use those data to help inform the estimates in the World Christian Database. So we're taking in a lot of information every single day to come up with our best estimates of 18 categories of religion and non-religion in all of the world's 237 countries. Okay, so let's look at the trends. So this is what we call, in official statistical terms, a boring line graph. And this is where Professor Chua is getting very nervous that he invited this demographer from Harvard and all she's showing is a flat line on the graph. But actually, what this is showing is that about a third of the world was Christian in the year 1900. About a third of the world is Christian today. And we anticipate in the future, about a third of the world will be Christian. Wow. This is so very exciting. But what this flat line hides is actually one of the most dramatic transformations of any religion at any point in human history. So at the beginning of the 20th century, in the year 1900, 82% of all Christians in the world lived in what the United Nations defines as the global north, Europe and North America, and 18% of Christians lived in what the United Nations calls the global south, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. I emphasize the United Nations because I don't decide how many people live in each country. So I'm using United Nations data, United Nations designations. The United Nations says that China and East Asia are in the global south. You can fight with the United Nations about it. That's not my decision, okay? Just putting that out there because someone always says, well, Korea this, okay, I know, but this is what we're working with, okay? Global north, global south. 82% of Christians in the north, 18% of Christians in the south. Now, nobody blink, because this is the makeup of world Christianity today, where now 31% of all Christians live in the north, and 69% of all Christians live in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. This is a very different world Christianity than 100 years ago. Frankly, it's a very different world Christianity than my grandparents' generation, than maybe even my parents' generation. So Christianity is shifting. If we continue the trend line, if all things remain the same, which they rarely do, but if they do, an estimated 83% of all Christians in the world will be in the global south in the year 2075. It's a near reversal from what it was in the year 1900. I actually could not believe when the data came out this way, as if I planned it, but I didn't. It actually just happened this way. Down here, we have the makeup of Christianity by continent. And so what this tells you, in the year 1900, 68% of all Christians lived in Europe. But by the year 2075, it could be that 47% of all Christians live in Africa. So we have to ask ourselves, where is the center of world Christianity now? Where is the center of theological education, of mission, of Bible translation, of history, of money? Economic analyses of world Christianity are very interesting with these dynamics, where you have more of the Christians in the south, but more of the Christian wealth is still in the north, creating a very interesting tension in world Christianity. So Christianity is a truly global religion that has undergone a truly global transformation. So this is a map of the percent Christian in the year 2025. So here's our snapshot of our most recent data. And the darker the blue is the higher concentration of Christians, and the lighter blue is a lower concentration of Christians. Now, I want to emphasize here again what the definition of Christian is. I'm a social scientist. I take social science perspectives, and the gold standard in social science research is self-identification. If you call yourself a Christian, you are counted as a Christian. Whether or not you ever go to church, or you tithe, or you're just a Christmas or Easter Christian. Actually, it doesn't matter to me. If you call yourself a Christian, you're a Christian. So here you can see Europe, for example, is still very dark blue. Even though Europe is supposed to be post-Christian, right? Europe is not Christian, Europe has secularized. Okay, yes, except for that, everybody wants to be born, married, and died and buried in a church still. So religion is a very complicated thing. It is not black and white. Actually, the hardest thing for us to answer as demographers is who is religious and who is not religious. Think about it. If you take a survey, and a lot of people, you take a survey and they ask, what is your religion? And you check Christian. Okay, great. But then it says, do you ever go to church? No. Do you tithe? No. Do you believe in God? Not really. Okay, like you're a Christian because you checked the Christian box. But then the reverse happens. What is your religion? None. Do you believe in God? Yes. Do you attend religious services? Yes. Do you give money to a religious organization? Yes, right? And both these things are happening at the same time. And so it's actually, there are many different opinions among social scientists of those two examples, who is religious and who isn't. And so you have some social scientists that come out that the world is becoming less religious, and some social scientists who say, actually, the world is still a very religious place, but maybe religion is changing. Maybe institutional religion is the thing that's really on the decline, but spirituality is doing just fine, right? You don't necessarily need an institution to believe in God and do good works and to believe in Jesus and believe in the tenets of Christianity, right? Okay, that was actually a tangent. So here we've got Europe. That's all to say, Europe is still very dark blue and still comes out as Christian in this analysis because it's Christian by membership and affiliation. North America, and we're going to look at each of these continents a little more closely. You can see an interesting dynamic in Africa, where we've got more Christians in the south than we do the north. The Middle East and much of Asia still coming out very light blue, lower concentrations of Christians. If you can see from where you're sitting, these three dark blue provinces right there, those are the majority Christian provinces of Northeast India. The Philippines, the largest Christian, quote-unquote, country in Asia. And then, of course, we have Oceania down here. Never forget Oceania and all these Pacific islands that are very hard to map, but are there. So this is your big picture of the world's 2.6 billion Christians, roughly a third of the world's population. The United States is the country with the most Christians today. We anticipate by the year 2075, the Democratic Republic of the Congo will be the country with the most Christians in the world. And Nigeria will be the country with the second largest number of Christians in the world, and then the United States will be third. This is a very different world Christianity, that the Congo and Nigeria are now the countries with the most Christians. And yet, a lot of the Christianity that has spread around the world has ties to the United States. But what if it had ties to Nigeria instead? It'd be a very different kind of Christianity. Okay, let's look at a taxonomy. Anyone like a good taxonomy? I love a good taxonomy. So another way to understand world Christianity is through what we call its major Christian traditions. So the major Christian traditions are Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants, and Independents. You've probably heard of Catholics, you've probably heard of Orthodox, and you've probably heard of Protestants. Okay, but who are the Independents? Well, Independents are Christians who do not self-identify as Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant, such as those African independent churches that David Barrett was counting in the 1950s and 60s, right? There's even something called the OAIC, the Organization of African Independent Churches. So they self-identify as independent. And so we have a separate category. It's a sociological category. And then there's two movements within the major Christian traditions, evangelicals and Pentecostal charismatics. So you can mix and match the 4 and the 2. You can be a Catholic charismatic, you can be a Protestant evangelical, you can be an independent evangelical charismatic. So you see how the taxonomy works? Movements within the major Christian traditions. So here's a map of the Christian traditions. So Catholics are this pink color here, and we've got a lot of states in North America, and of course most of Latin America is majority Catholic. Western Europe, Southern Europe, very obviously the home of the Vatican here, lots of Catholic countries. When you think of Catholicism, though, do you think of the Democratic Republic of the Congo? Because actually, the DRC has had the fastest Catholic growth rate in the world, and the majority Christianity in the DRC is Catholic. So when we think Catholic, we think the Pope in Rome, which makes sense, but we really ought to be thinking of Africa and African Catholics. The next up is independence, which is this dark purple. So China and India come out as majority independent in its kind of Christianity. For China, it's the unregistered churches that are independent. They're not technically Protestant. They're not part of Protestant denominations, even though theologically they might be Protestant, right? I'm a social scientist, not a theologian. And then India, we've also got some interesting enculturated movements between Hinduism and Christianity that can be considered independent. As someone coming from the US, one of my favorite things about this map is Texas. Texas is independent. If you know anything about Texas, it just is independent. And it's because of the large megachurches there. They are just their own thing. So that comes out in the data. And I also love that you can see the Bible Belt of the majority Protestant. So green is the Protestant color. And you can also see historical movements of people. So these Protestants are from Scandinavian migration in the 18th century. So it's all the Lutherans coming out there. Just so fun. But you can also see Protestants, so there's the Lutherans in Scandinavia. The Anglicans are considered Protestant in this analysis. So you can see remnants of the British Empire in the data too, because wherever the British went, Anglicanism went with it. So we have large Anglican populations in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Kenya, and then of course throughout Southeast Asia, Oceania as well. And then the Orthodox are this light purple color. Historically, Central Asia was the historic home of Orthodox Christianity, which is the most unfortunate geographic home because they faced pressure from Catholics, they faced pressure from Muslims, they faced pressure from Ottomans, and then faced pressure from Soviets. So Orthodox Christianity has a very different historical trajectory and current kind of way of thinking, much more survival-oriented in the Orthodox tradition. So Orthodoxy is actually the only tradition within Christianity that is majority global north, because most Orthodox live in Eastern Europe, with, of course, historic exceptions in Egypt and Ethiopia. So Catholics, Independents, Protestants, Evangelicals, and Pentecostals are all majority global South traditions today. About half of the world's Christians are Catholics, and then Protestants are the next largest, Independents, and then Orthodox are the smallest. So next I'm going to show something that I'm never supposed to show on a PowerPoint, which is a table. But it's only one, I'm sorry, and you'll see why in a sec. I know you're never supposed to do this in graphic design and presentations, but I'm doing it anyway. So if we go one level down in the taxonomy, you get what's called Christian families. And so looking at world Christianity through the lens of Christian families gives you a really good sense of growth and decline, and this is over the last 50 years. So the red line here represents global population change over the 50-year period. And then each of these lines shows whether this Christian family was growing faster than global population change or slower than global population change. That's the real test of growth or decline. Is your church growing faster than the world's population or slower than the world's population? So the families here, I'm going to read them in case you can't see this. Catholics are a major Christian tradition and a family. Here we've got Pentecostals, Evangelicals, Eastern Orthodox, Anglicans, United Church, Baptists. This is what you might think as denominations, but we call them families. Oriental and other Orthodox, Reformed Presbyterian, Lutheran, non-traditional house or cell movements, non-denominational, Methodist, Adventist, Latter-day Saints, Mormons. Mormons are counted as Christians because they self-identify as Christians. Jehovah's Witnesses, same thing. Holiness, Eastern Rite Catholics, Restorationists, and Congregationalists. So these are what we call the families. So you can see that the groups that are growing underneath this red line are mostly the, quote, historic mainline Protestant churches. So it's include also Eastern Orthodox, Anglicans, Baptists, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Methodists. These are the churches that are not keeping up with global population growth. But these groups are the ones that are. So looking at Pentecostal charismatics, non-traditional house cell Christianity, and Mormons experience some of the fastest growth rates over the last 50 years. So this is a very interesting finding and dynamic that shows you the true makeup of world Christianity today. Wherever Christianity spread in the 20th century and continues to spread today, it is mostly evangelical, Pentecostal, and charismatic in nature. And this category here, which I'm thinking of renaming, quote, non-traditional house or cell, Why is it non-traditional? I inherited this tradition, and so I'm making lots of changes along the way. These are the things that keep me up at night. Is it really non-traditional? Is it not becoming the tradition now of these somewhat non-denominational, loosely affiliated, networked, unregistered, underground cell movements, right? This is becoming the norm for world Christianity, not the non-traditional. If these trends continue, it'll be the Lutherans who are non-traditional, frankly, and it'll be the house churches that are the traditional. Okay, let's take a quick trip around the world and look at some continental trends. As an aside, all the photos that you see in this presentation are actual Christians around the world, because we don't just do statistics. It's statistics with a human face. If you are a part of a church that has 1,000 people in it, and you leave that church, now there's 999 people in that church, and that matters. This is a human science of real people, not just numbers on a page. So here's Africa. Here's a map of Africa at the beginning of the 20th century. So we have historical data back to the year 1900 by country. So you can see kind of remnants of colonial Christianity here. Well, not remnants, the beginning of, frankly, the colonial empire here. Africa was 9% Christian in the year 1900 and is 49% Christian today. And you can see here in this religion map where Christianity in the south meets Islam in the north across the Sahel. So you have countries like Nigeria that are nearly 50-50 split between Muslims in the north and Christians in the south. But let's talk about Nigeria for a sec in terms of babies, converts, migrants. Maybe not so much migrants, babies, converts. So we have a majority Muslim north and a majority Christian south. Generally, Christians tend to educate their women at higher rates than Muslims educate their women. When women get more education, they have higher economic opportunities, greater job prospects. Greater job prospects and economic opportunities always leads to lower birth rates. They say there are just a few true things in this world, death and taxes. And higher education for women leads to lower birth rates. That is just as true as death and taxes. There's actually very few things that are true in literally every place around the world. It's death, taxes, and the connection between education and fertility. That's your demographic tidbit. When you're at a cocktail party, say, "Did you know?" You'll have that one. It'll be good. It's good. Okay, so then you get Nigeria, where you have more education for women means fewer births, and less education for Muslim women means more births. So just by nature of birth rates, Nigeria has already become a majority Muslim country, and that trend will continue into the future. Now, there are some Christians who would be unhappy about that. Frankly, there's a lot of Nigerian Christians who would be unhappy about that, but no sane Christian would say, "Stop educating our women," right? Now, I have to be very careful when I talk about this, because one day, someone called my office and said, "Hello, I heard you talk about how babies are the future of world Christianity, and I am a pastor, and I'd like you to tell me how to encourage my church to have more children." And I said, "Oh no, that's not really what I meant. I'm just giving you the facts. That's your job. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just telling you what's happening and what may happen in the future. Please don't quote me in that way." But this is a real thing. This is a reality. But where does the converts piece come into this? Because every time I give this Nigeria example, and there's a Nigerian in the room, they often raise their hand and tell me how wrong I am, which is fine. I can take it. And they say, "But what about the missionary movement from the south to the north?" And it's true. There is a very robust Christian missionary movement of Nigerians leaving the south to go and evangelize Muslims in the north. And I know that that's true. I know that that's happening. Show me the data. I don't work on vibes. You can't just tell me that people are converting to Christianity in northern Nigeria. Show me the data, and then we'll talk about it, and we can make adjustments. So we need the data. So that's why the conversion piece is actually really hard to track, because a lot of places where people are converting to Christianity are kind of difficult places. It's northern Nigeria, it's the Middle East, it's unregistered churches in China, it's creative contextual movements in India. Very hard places to track. But if there's data, I want to see it. Moving on to Asia. Asia was 2% Christian in the year 1900 and is 8% Christian today. And there's quite a lot of diversity in Asia. Asia is so big. There is no such thing as Asian Christianity. Too big. We're talking about from Israel and Turkey in the West, all the way down to the Philippines, to Malaysia, to Japan, to Korea. I mean, this is like a huge swath. But there's very interesting things happening here. I want to point out a couple of them. One, you can see these northeastern regions much more clearly of these majority Christian regions in India. You know, one trend I'm seeing quite a lot of are young Christians from Nagaland, which is one of these states, engaging in theological education in the West. That's a very positive development, that there is enough support in these Christian communities now that they can do that. They can move to the United States for theological education. This is a healthy sign of development. We can see some dynamics in India where the south is more Christian than the north. So we have a lot of missions also happening within India, of southern to northern. Anyone notice these dark blue areas in Saudi Arabia? What? I thought there weren't supposed to be any Christians in Saudi Arabia. It's Saudi Arabia. It's the home of Islam. Who are the Christians of Saudi Arabia? Filipinos. It's Filipinos. So lots of people will tell you there's no Christians in Saudi Arabia. Well, there's Christians in Saudi Arabia if you're tracking that third dynamic of religious change, of migration. There's Filipinos everywhere. There's Nigerians everywhere. There's Chinese everywhere. Diaspora is changing the religious landscape of the world. And so if you have Filipinos working in any of these states, in Qatar and UAE and Saudi Arabia, you have Catholics, right? So we track these trends, and we track this movement of people worldwide, so we get a better kind of on-the-ground perspective of what's happening. Asia, also, of course, you all know, is the most religiously diverse place. So this shows you, these are the 18 categories of religion that we track, actually. And you can see Asia's got it all. Asia is the historic home of most of the world's religions. It has the largest populations of most of the world's religions, and this shows you the change from 1975 to 2025. And we, of course, have large populations of Muslims, Hindus, non-religious, Buddhists, Chinese traditional religion. When you have a country of 1 billion people, you get your own religion. That's how it works. Christianity, traditional religion, so on and so forth. So tons and tons of religious diversity. Now, I live in a country, the United States, that is increasing its religious diversity. I do not want to read any books by Americans about how to be a Christian in a religiously diverse place. I want to read books by Asians about how to live in a religiously diverse place, because Asian Christians have been doing it since ever and are actively doing it. This is a new phenomenon for people in the West. I don't want to hear the analysis of a white guy about how to do this. I want to hear an analysis from my Asian brothers and sisters on how to be a Christian in a religiously diverse place. This is what world Christianity is about, learning from the people who know it the best. Oh, and then we have East Asia. I had to have an East Asia slide because we're here. So here's East Asia religion, and then East Asia Christianity. So by percentage, South Korea has the largest percentage of Christians in East Asia at roughly a third. China has the largest population of Christians. I have to say, I know this is being recorded. I did actually remove 22 million Christians from China this morning. I'm really sorry. I did. There's a lot, as you know, there's a lot of debate about how many Christians are in China, and it's because of uncertainties about the unregistered churches. They are unregistered. They don't show up on a survey. The government's not going to report on it. There's a black box around China right now and what's happening. And I just think we had our trend line just going too high for too long. And so I just tamped it down a little. So it's not as dramatic as, what's 22 million in China, right? It's not that many people. So it's about, this says 9 as of this morning. This is the latest data you could possibly get. This morning from my hotel room, it's now 7. But there's a lot of questions about it. Okay, I need to keep going. Europe. So the thing that lots of people talk about with European Christianity is decline. Decline of institutional Christianity, decline of Catholicism, of Anglicanism, even of Orthodoxy. And this is true. So if we were to take this back to the year 1900, Europe was pretty much 100%, or like 99% Christian, and now we're at a much lower percentage. But again, the diaspora piece is just as important of a story as the decline piece, because every major European city has large populations of migrant churches. For example, in Italy alone, there are 1,000 congregations of a particular Nigerian Pentecostal and a particular Ghanaian Pentecostal church. That's just Italy, and just 2 churches, 1,000 congregations, right? That's not going to get picked up on a survey. That's local knowledge of figuring out what's happening on the ground. So for those of you who want to do studies of world Christianity, we need more studies of migrant Christianity, especially in the world's major cities. Latin America. So Latin America has been Catholic for a long, long time because of colonization from Spain and Portugal. But in the 20th century, we had really the introduction of Pentecostal and evangelical Christianity. Now about 80% of all Christians in Latin America are Catholic, and 80% are what's called evangelicos, which is essentially not Catholics. So we have 80% Catholic, 20% not Catholic. We are seeing some secularization trends in Latin America, but Latin America still remains a very, very religious place. Moving on to North America. So North America includes Canada and the United States as the 2 largest, and a couple small places. Greenland does not belong to the United States. Just gonna make that clear. Make that clear. As of today, that is true. It is still in North, anyway. So as I said, we are getting more religiously diverse in North America, and we are seeing some decline, but the decline needs to be nuanced. In the United States, it's really the white majority churches that are in the steepest decline. The Black churches, the Hispanic churches, and the Asian American churches are either static or maybe even growing. So again, these narratives that we hear, this painting with a broad brush, you have to ask a deeper question when you hear these narratives. It's white Christianity that's in decline. And remember how I said the United States is the country with the most Christians? Well, the reason it has been the country with the most Christians for a long, long time is because of immigration from Latin America. Because the migrants coming to Latin America are Christian. Actually, it's been immigration from Latin America that has kept the United States as the country with the most Christians in the world. But as of this year, the border is closed. So now there's no new Christians coming into the United States, which seems rather counterintuitive if you think about it, with the priorities of the American administration at the moment. So it remains to be seen what will happen, frankly, to American Christianity. It's already poised to not be the country with the most Christians, but could that decline be even greater? I haven't actually done the projection of what the impact of the current border closure could be for American. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do it tomorrow in the hotel room, and I'll let you know. Okay, last but never least is Oceania. I love Oceania because Oceania is a microcosm of world Christianity. Because Australia and New Zealand are Western countries experiencing a lot of rapid decline. So you see this downward trajectory here. It's because of Australia and New Zealand. But the Pacific Islands, Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, are highly religious places. Look, Melanesia grew from 15% Christian to 93% Christian. Micronesia that one was still 76, 93. Polynesia has always been Christian for a long time. But this is because of Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea was 4% Christian at the beginning of the 20th century, and now it's 95% Christian. So often the trends of Australia and New Zealand overtake the Pacific Islands, but most of the Pacific Islands are over 90% Christian, and Christianity is a core part of Pacifica culture and society, and really what it means to be Pacifica. So I like to draw attention to this region. I want to give a little footnote to the Middle East. So the Middle East has had a lot of trouble in its Christian population, really since 2003 and the US-led invasion of Iraq fundamentally changed the situation for Christian minorities in the Middle East. Iraq caused a ripple effect throughout the region. What you might not be aware of is in the year 1900, the Middle East was 13% Christian. but today it's only 4% Christian. Now, the future is very hard to know. With the rise of ISIS in the 2015 era, we saw a rapid decline of Christian communities, and we're 10 years past that, and we're not seeing return. I was working in Iraq this morning, actually, and Iraq was maybe 4 or 5% Christian in the year 2000, and now I just put it at 0.4%. And that trajectory appears to be continuing. So this is a situation we watch very closely about minority Christians in the Middle East. Okay, a couple slides just about world religions, just so you get the sense. Remember, we're tracking every religion in every country. I like these very colorful tower graphs. So here's the religious situation of 1900. The world was nearly entirely religious at the beginning of the 20th century. 1975 represents kind of the height of the non-religious. Why? You know why. Because of the Soviet Union and because of communism in China. So you had state-imposed atheism come onto the world stage so that you had a huge population of non-religious. But we have to ask ourselves, when state-imposed atheism comes, does religion just poof away? No, it goes underground. And if we learned anything from the Soviet Union, because when the Soviet Union fell in 1991, what happened? Religion came back because everyone was underground, because there were Orthodox grandmothers baptizing babies in secret, right? And like keeping the faith alive. Do not underestimate women in all of this. My other big thing that I'll come back next year to talk about is women in world Christianity, okay? So I need an invitation next year to talk about women. Okay, good. Just come back next year. And so actually, the world has gotten more religious since that period, but there's lots of questions about the future, lots of questions. It's true that a lot of people are leaving religion in the global north, in Australia and New Zealand, some in Latin America. But what I want to make sure everyone's aware of is the world is still a very religious place. More people are born into religion than non-religion every single day. And we also have to keep in mind the difference between institutional religion and spirituality. Even if you're not a member of an institutional religion, does not mean you're not a religious person. So actually, my work is getting harder. The less institutional, the harder it is to track the data. The last slide, or the last graph I want to show is Christianity and Islam. I get asked this a lot. So Christianity is still the world's largest religion. Islam is not yet larger than Christianity, but if current trends continue, it will likely become the world's largest religion by the year 2100. And this is because of babies. Migration is a net zero globally, because where people leave, they come, right? Okay, babies. The answer is always babies. Like in church, it's like God, Jesus, Bible, Holy Spirit, like in Sunday school. The answer here is always babies. Okay, so Muslims have on average 3.1 children per woman, and Christians have about 2.7 children per woman. So just by basic demography, this is what will happen. Now, there's lots of change happening in demography, and we're tracking it all the time, so we will see if these trends continue. Okay, let's end our time together by looking at just a handful of important issues for Christians. You like my Brazilian nuns? Aren't they great? This is not every single issue that's important for Christians in the world. So if you are a Christian and I don't mention the thing that you are interested in, it's not because I don't think it's interesting or important. That's my disclaimer. But the first thing I want to say is history. Look at these incredible photos from Myanmar and from Mexico of women. Very interesting photos. So with the shift of Christianity to the global south, we need more local scholarship to de-center Eurocentrism in our understanding of church history. With a global church, we need global church history. So this means locating different kinds of sources, indigenous perspectives, and prioritizing different languages than we typically do church history in. It also involves more oral history and more biography. And so there is so much history for us to uncover. So stop doing Western church history and do the rest of the world. Okay. The next is education, right? Babies, converts, migrants. Education has always been a really important thing for Christians worldwide. They are extremely active in providing education, especially secondary and primary, and especially in countries where governments just can't do it. So the Democratic Republic of Congo, the country that's poised to be the largest Christian country, is pretty much upheld by the Roman Catholic Church. They run thousands of Catholic schools and hospitals in the DRC because the DRC is functionally a broken state and can't do it themselves. Globally, the Catholic Church runs 95,000 elementary schools and 47,000 secondary schools. And so we need more institutes of theological education in the Global South, in places where Christianity is growing, that can develop models that fit the local place. So I'm not just talking about doing Western theological education in other places around the world. We need local, contextual theological education to help educate Christians worldwide. In my opinion, the climate crisis is arguably the most critical global issue because what happens in one place around the world directly impacts that of another. So the Pacific Islands, some of the most Christian countries in the world, many of them will not exist by the year 2050 because of what other large industrialized nations have done to the environment. The United States, remember, the country with the most Christians, also the country with the largest ever historical emitter of carbon into the world. So Pacifica people are disproportionately feeling the impacts from places like the US, which also has a large population of climate change deniers. Next up is poverty and healthcare. So the rapid growth of Christianity in the 20th century often occurred in places where people generally, not always, generally have a much lower quality of life. So much of the Global South deals with serious issues related to poverty, proper healthcare, access to clean water, and disease. Countries that have been hardest hit by, for example, HIV/AIDS are also countries where Christianity has flourished, like Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Eswatini. And so Christian hospitals, clinics, and centers, especially for women and children, are just indispensable in these places. And frankly, economic justice is a huge issue for a lot of Christians of the Global South. And so we need to do more to address the wealth gap that exists in world Christianity. And to give a teaser for my next year lecture, women. So women, I have written a book about women in world Christianity, and women are fundamentally critical to the spread and the health and the flourishing of Christian communities worldwide, whether they're properly recognized for that work or not. So my research has found that women are indeed the majority of church members all around the world. They're the most active participants, yet they suffer from a lack of equality in almost every church in the world, frankly, because there is not a single country in the world where women have complete physical safety. So women in the world are just asking a different set of questions than men are asking. And the last thing I want to leave with you is interreligious relations. So given the demographic trends, it has never been as important for people, both religious and non-religious people, to be aware of our multi-religious world. And this is why I love doing world Christianity at Harvard Divinity School, because Harvard Divinity School is one of two intentionally multi-religious divinity schools in the US, and we train people both for academia and for ministry. So in my classes on world Christianity, I have Muslims, I have Jewish students, I have Christian students, I have non-religious students, all learning about world Christianity together. And that's just like life, right? Interacting with people all from all different faith and no faith traditions. We are flexing those muscles in the classroom every day, and I just love it. So let's end where we began, with our quote from Kima Pachow. Christianity exists between the universal claim of its message and the particular way of practicing the faith. You see it now, right? With the shift of Christianity to the Global South, Christianity has never been more global. It's never been more diverse. It's in all these different political situations and histories and languages and ethnicities, and it looks different in all different places around the world. Yet there's still something called world Christianity. The universality is there. So I leave you with this. I leave you with amazing Christian art from around the world, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you. You are definitely invited back.
Yay!
Yes, definitely. Okay. Okay, we have about 15 minutes for questions. So you have to be fast, okay? And they have to be good questions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to maybe should we take 3 questions and
Whatever you
then,
want.
because I think it's more efficient that way to do that. So if you have a question, can you put your hand up? You better have a question quickly because, okay, I'm just going to come to you and you ask your question. All right. Question.
Hi. So I have a question about Nigeria, because you mentioned that Nigeria is going to be the second largest Christians in the world. But then you also mentioned that Nigeria, actually, the north are more Muslims, and then the women are actually bearing children, but not the Christians. So how does that reconcile?
Oh,
Okay, Nigeria question? That's one question?
I know.
Yes. Who else has a question? Over there. Okay.
I gotta remember
All right.
the questions.
Yeah, don't worry, you have to remember.
Help me.
Nigeria question?
Nigeria.
Dr. Gina, real quick, when Todd Johnson came to visit Biola, I helped to host him.
Oh.
I was wondering, asking the same question as I asked you for Hong Kong, is how statistics from either Harvard or Gordon Conwell of how dependent Hong Kong Christianity is on Western theological education.
Ooh.
And what is it just this question too, like how does it change?
Yep.
Okay, one more question. Okay, question.
Okay. This is not one, multiple
No,
questions.
one.
Oh,
One.
All right. You talk about the birth rate in relation to women's education. And how about the rate of marriage in relation to the education among Christians?
Okay,
Great.
Nigeria, Hong Kong, and marriage.
Okay, Nigeria, fantastic observation. And the reason is because the Nigerian growth rate is insane. That's why both these things that might seem contradictory are still true. So yes, Christianity is the second largest religion, but overall the birth rates are still so much higher than anywhere else. Now, there's a lot of debate among demographers is how fast will Africa undergo the second demographic transition? And the second demographic transition is essentially the drop in birth rates. So we're seeing inklings. So instead of like 10 children per woman, it's like 7 or 8 children per woman, which is still very high globally, but is declining. So this is something we're watching very closely, is how fast are African birth rates going to decline? And I'm going to tie it to this question. I'm not forgetting Hong Kong, because marriage and family is related to this, right? So there have been studies about like desired children per family. Generally, men want more children than women do. I wonder why. But the desire for large families is still very high among sub-Saharan African women. And so this kind of even though they are getting more education. So like compared to like East Asian standards and Western standards, you would think that Nigerian and sub-Saharan African women would want smaller families, like 1 or 2, but they actually don't. So they want the education and they want the larger families. Now, in terms of age of first marriage, this is a really important demographic element, because the younger you marry, the more childbearing years you have. The older you marry, the fewer childbearing years you have. So I do think marriage rates are slightly increasing. I don't know the exact number for, the global south. I'm not sure what the average is. We know in the West, the age of first marriage has really shot up. And that is directly tied to the birth rate decline. So I'd have to look up the exact statistics for kind of global south. I think it's still younger than the global north, but I'm not sure the exact figures, but that is a piece of the puzzle. Hong Kong. I am going to answer your specific question with a general answer, which is, because honestly, I am not going to talk about Hong Kong in a room full of people from Hong Kong. Like, I'm not a dummy. But I will say generally, we see a lot of exportation of American evangelical and Pentecostal Christianity worldwide. We see it in worship. We see it in theological education. We see it in theology, the books that are being read. I'm going to give you a specific example from Mongolia. So I was in Mongolia. I've been there a few times. Very young church there. And I was in a room with all Mongolian Christians giving a very similar talk to this, global Asia, Mongolian stacks, this and that. And we started talking about theology. And I said, tell me, who you're reading. And so they started naming all these white American men. And I said, okay. Do you read any Asian theologians? And they said, no, absolutely not. And I said, well, why not? And they said, we don't trust them. And I was like, tell me more. and for Mongolia, it's a very specific context. And they said to me, we look Asian, but inner we're Soviet, right? Because Mongolia had only become an independent nation after 1991, and the Soviets tried to erase Mongolian history. So it's a very young church, it's a very young nation. So just trying to figure out what it means to be Mongolian. But for them to say we don't trust Asian theologians, to me that is concerning. I trust Asian theologians. I trust African theologians. I trust Latin American theologians. My life and my faith is enriched by reading theology from places that I am not from, that I do not identify with. So I personally have concerns about the oversaturation of American evangelical theology. So that's but Hong Kong specific, I'm not sure. But I would say Asia generally, I see the trend. Is that fair? Maybe it's not fair.
More questions. Anyone from this side? Yes, there's one here. Okay.
Can you please comment on the Generation Z?
Yeah.
They are described as more spiritual, but not religious.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Generation Zen. There's a question here. I'm doing a lot of work today.
Thank you. You talked a bit about the growth of the untraditional churches in the numbers just now, but what's the kind of theology that is practiced within them?
Thank you. And any questions in the back here? Your chance. Any more questions here? Oh, that's at the front. Okay, Steve.
Just had a quick question going with the Generation Z, but with revival movements, we hear about these little movements. Do you track those as well?
Great questions. I love when people ask good questions. Okay, Generation Z. I'm American. Generation Z. This feels wrong to me, but Gen Z. So the trends generationally are very clear. That boomers are more religious, Gen X is less, millennial is less, Gen Z is the least. I do think this masks the creativity of Gen Z. I love Gen Z. I'm a millennial. My daughter is a Gen Z. I love them. I love you who are here. The creativity of Gen Z is really interesting. And I think we're seeing this reality that I described of kind of bucking institutional religion in favor of spirituality most acutely in Gen Z. They don't want to give money. Well, they don't have any money. They don't want to give time. You'll have money when you get older. They don't want to give time to an institutional church when they can give time to a community, to a network, right? And so I think the data are showing that the most creative and flexible approaches to faith we're really seeing from Gen Z. So there's not a lot of data yet, but what is coming out is showing a very different religious picture. But this quiet revival, maybe we've heard this phrase, I'm not a fan of the quiet revival study itself. It's not very rigorous from a social science perspective. So I'm not, and I think revival is too strong a word. So because we are seeing the decline, yet we do have this spirituality. So it's kind of like a jumbled mess right now, honestly. I don't think a revival is happening. I do think change is happening. Now, I will say a lot of people have these anecdotal experiences. Oh, I know young people who do X, or my niece or my nephew or my kids or whatever are doing Y. And those things are probably true. Like I'm hearing a lot actually from Orthodox churches, a new generation of young men joining Orthodox churches with a very specific sense of what it means to be Christian in a very masculine way, that they're finding their way in Orthodox churches. So we're seeing these little bits of information, but we don't really have enough research yet to draw like a bigger picture. So TBD on that. And what was the last question?
I can't remember. What's your question again?
Oh, theology of the, quote, non-traditional. Okay. So as I said, most of the growth has been in these non-traditional movements, and most of the growth is Pentecostal, charismatic, evangelical. These are highly committed Christians because they don't have the luxury of being nominal. They weren't raised in the faith. They intentionally left behind another religious tradition, and leaving behind another religious tradition is leaving behind a family, an ancestry, a community, right? And having to build a whole new one. It means giving up your personal safety to become a Christian in Iran, right? Or, in a lot of places. So The theology is very biblically grounded. It's very biblically a literal reading of scripture, a lot of emphasis on healings, on signs and wonders, because they read them in the Bible, right? It's right there in scripture. So they're very charismatic expressions of the faith. Usually more traditional gender norms, although there are a lot of networks that are led by women who convert to Christianity and lead other women and start networks of women. So if you want to talk about kind of the conservative, liberal spectrum, they're pretty conservative, as is most of the Christianity of the Global South. Yeah.
Okay, I'm afraid we have run out of time.
I can be like a little late to
Can
dinner.
you be a little late for dinner? That'd be cool.
Like a little.
Okay, a
I
little
already
bit late.
am.
Okay.
Actually,
so-
it started 15 minutes ago, so
Okay,
I'm already
you're already late. Okay, so any more questions, please? We can take. Should we take two more?
Yeah, take two
Yeah,
more.
two more questions. There's one here.
Or take three. There's three.
Take three. Okay. Well, okay. We take this one first. Okay.
Okay, thank you. We talked about women next year, right?
Yes.
And then the year after, I wonder about children. I mean, we talked about Gen Z, right? Flexible, but you talked about how Christianity spreads through education, where government cannot take on the role, then Christians take over the role. But nowadays, we see more and more that governments do take on the role as secular education. So there's one element there. And then other one, you talk about the Gen Z being very creative, right? So then the institutional element is less appealing. So what's the future like in that way? Thank you.
Okay. Good question. Okay. Any more questions? This one back here. Okay.
So perhaps my first question is on, for example, like countries like Korea, the non-traditional churches, they are not that conservative. They are mostly, allowed me to say in a perhaps rude word, cult.
Yes,
Okay.
the cults.
So I'm not sure if this counts to the World Christian Encyclopedia. How do you actually account for like this kind of sect in the Christianity? Perhaps the second one is, as an educator myself, how does the research like inform me? How can I do my job better to like either evangelize my students or whatnot? So yes, thank you.
Thank you. One last question over here. Okay.
Thank you for a very fascinating talk. So just now you were saying that there are Mongolian Christians who feedback to you that they don't trust Asian theologians, right? But I don't think that can be taken as representative of most Asian churches, right? Because I mean, I'm an Asian theologian myself, and
I trust you.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I have Asian Christians who trust me too, right? And,
Yeah, good.
I've written books in Chinese as well, and these books have been used by Asian seminaries. So I think it varies from places to places, and so my question to you is that so have you done analysis on how this kind of trust will vary from places to places, and maybe it could be influenced by particular histories? Have you done this kind of analysis? And also whether which will be the most a related question is which will be the most effective methods of conversion based on your statistical analysis? Because just now you were saying that probably Muslims will overtake Christians, and that's because of the birth rate. But then we also need to consider about maybe deconversion from Muslims to Christianity, right? So for example, so have you done this kind of analysis on which ways are the best to which are the Muslims, for example, and also atheists and other people? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Three
Man,
questions.
tough. Hard.
You asked for these three.
Okay.
Okay. One more. Okay. This is one last question,
Okay.
but you don't have to answer them all.
Okay.
This is a very quick one. Do you track language? Which is the most popular language?
Okay.
Yeah.
I track language. Okay.
Okay. Children. I'm going to thank you. Children. I had a great answer to your question before the other questions came. Children. Oh yeah, government's taking over. Okay, that's what it was. So I get asked this question everywhere I go. Then I would say one of the top 5 concerns of Christians around the world is faith transmission to the next generation. Everywhere. I heard it from Tongan families. I heard it from Hong Kong families. I've heard it from Brazilian families. Everyone is asking this question. I do not have a great answer. I'm really sorry. I do not have a great answer. I am parenting a teenager. I don't have a great answer in my own family of faith trans. It's really, every parent in this room knows how hard it is to just connect with your young adult teen. Never mind on these deeper matters of spirituality. It's really, really hard. I guess I don't have any good research. I just give you my own kind of personal, like as a parent and kind of what I watch and see. Like young people need space to be themselves, but they also need guardrails at the same time. So finding that balance between the two. So institutional churches still exist and they have something to offer, but they need to adjust to the next generation. Like they have to adjust. And I do see a lot of institutions that will not adjust because this is the right way to do it. And I'm sure it is the right way to do it. Maybe it was the right way to do it in the 70s or 80s. Is it the right way to do it in the 2020s? So we need more creative leadership. And there are people who study this better than I do. So that's my only answer to that.
Cults.
What was it?
Cults.
Oh, the cults. I only get asked about cults when I come to East Asia. Yeah, the quote, we call them new religious movements in the academic study of religion, the new religious movements. No, I understand the theological concerns. There are some very interesting theological trends that are coming out of some of these churches in South Korea that I know is very concerning for a lot of more traditional Christians in this region. The Mongolians asked me about the cults too. The only thing that I can say, because I'm working in self-identification, they call themselves Christians. And that is part of what it means to be in a family, is that sometimes you have cousins and uncles that you don't like, right? And that's like part of what it means to be part of a family. So from a practical perspective, I don't have a lot of good answers, except for that they do count in this analysis. But if I took out all the groups that different people didn't like, I'd have no Christians left, right? So that's my answer to that. You are totally right. Mongolia is in no way representative of Asian Christianity. There is no representative Asian Christianity. And there's lots of Asian theology out there that is being read widely. But I do think, at least in a lot of the people that I talk to, there is this preference for the dead white Germans, for the Americans, kind of because that is capital T theology. But then there's Asian theology and Minjung theology and liberation theology and womanist theology and all this contextual theology that I do think people see as lesser than capital T theology. This is a big problem in world Christianity. All theology is contextual. The Western theology is Western. It's Western theology. It is just as contextual as Asian theology is. It's just being contextualized to the West. So we have a big problem in theological studies of this perceived value of capital T Western theology over others. We need to just call theology what it is. Call dead German theology dead German theology. Like call it what it is, right? I probably shouldn't say that, but I mean,
That's fine.
am I wrong? Okay.
No, let's hear it for world Christianity.
Okay, and the quick answer is Spanish is the #1 mother tongue of Christians around the world, followed by English, followed by Portuguese, not because of Portugal, Brazil. Well, kind of because of Portugal, because of colonization. #4 is Russian, because of the Russian Orthodox Church, and #5 is Mandarin Chinese.
Okay, that's
And
fascinating.
I only know the top 5. I wasn't going to keep going to all 14,000 languages, but thank you. Good question.
That's amazing. Thank you very much for answering
Thank
our
you.
extra
Thank you.
questions. Thank you. Let's hear it for Gina Zurlo.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.